That's part of our job. One more lap! Get up there, circus clown! Do it again! One. Hey everybody, I'm Mike Levy and welcome back to another value field trip bike review. And this time around, we're talking about Rocky Mountain's Growler 40. Now Rocky builds this as an extremely capable hardtail, and it comes with a 140mm travel Sun Tour fork up front, and at 64 degrees, the slackest head angle of the bunch. And you can pick up a Growler 40 for yourself for $1,669 American. All right, let's take a look at some frame details, and being a hardtail, there's not a ton to cover, but still, Rocky has included a number of things that you'd want to see on any trail bike. Now, we'll go down the list, and that includes a threaded bottom bracket, a whole bunch of tire clearance, and a boost through axle at the back end. There's also internal cable routing, and those enter up at the head tube through a rubber port. The idea being, you could pull those rubber grommets out, and that provides more room and makes the job easier. All right, let's move on to a couple things that the Growler doesn't have. And the first and easiest to solve is chainstay protection. This thing comes completely naked, and the solution is, of course, just to wrap an old tube around the chainstay for free, and then your bike's gonna be a whole lot quieter. Now, the other thing to note is that you can definitely carry a water bottle on the down tube where they belong, and that's where you'd expect to see one, but there aren't any water bottle bosses on the seat tube. Being a hardtail, Rocky had all the real estate in the world here to mount a bottle cage, but not this time around. One last thing to touch on here, if we go back and look at the rear brake mount, it uses something called a flat mount rather than a post mount. Now this uses smaller bolts, and the actual adapter, it attaches to the chainstay itself. Now there's no right or wrong way to do this, but it does make adjusting the caliper a little bit trickier. Moving on to geometry, let's go back to that 64-degree head angle that I mentioned earlier. That's the slackest of the bunch, and we should probably talk about why. Being a hardtail, obviously there's no rear suspension for you to sit into. So when you sit on a hardtail, your fork compresses a little bit, and that head angle, well, it gets a little tiny bit steeper. So that is important to note. Seat angles on all the sizes sit at 75 degrees, and all sizes get the same 435mm chainstays. Now, reach numbers, well, those vary from 425 for the smallest size all the way up to 500mm. We have a medium-sized test bike, and that sits at 450mm. The Growler 40, costing $1,669 American, is the middle child of the bunch, and it also weighs 31 pounds and 3 ounces. Now, if you don't have quite that much money to spend, you can get the Growler 20, and that costs you $1,039 American. That bike gets a different spec, of course, with the two standout features being a less expensive Sun Tour fork, and it ditches the dropper post in favor of a traditional post that you gotta move up and down manually. The most expensive version is the Growler 50, and that one costs $2,100 American. For that, you're gonna get a RockShox 35 gold fork up front, a dropper post, of course, and a whole bunch of other nicer components. And that's the Growler model range. And the next thing to talk about, well, of course, is how this thing rides. So let's jump into it. So there's not a lot of setup going on with the hardtail, of course. We pump the tires up, 21, 23 PSI. We're running the same pressures on pretty much all the tires. The one thing I will mention is that it comes with a 140mm Sun Tour fork. We're gonna talk about that fork later on, but there's no recommended air pressure setting sticker. You know, you look on the back of the fork leg and there's that little sticker that tells you like a rough idea at least where to start. I mean, it's usually not right anyway, but it gives you an idea. That's not the case with the Sun Tour, so kind of fiddling around there to get it sorted, but yeah.
If you're looking at the numbers on the geocharts, it looks like this thing is all about the descents. How does it climb?
Obviously, Rocky has designed this thing to be a blast on the way back down. So I was curious about, how much that subtracted, how much that took away from its climbing ability. Turns out not a whole lot, really. It's not meant to go flying up the hills, and it doesn't do that, but it definitely gets you to the top. In the tight stuff, That 64-degree head angle, I was a little curious how it felt compared to the Canyon and the Norco and the other hardtails we have here. It's the longest hardtail as well, the longest wheelbase. But yeah, in the tighter stuff, it was fine. It worked just fine. Again, proving there's way more to this than just the numbers, I mean, 1 or 2 numbers. Yeah, it just works well.
So if somebody's looking at buying a hardtail and they're thinking, well, of course it's efficient because it's a hardtail, like what are some of the things that are actually different between, the BMC or this
Okay. So
Growler?
it climbs just fine. But if we want to boil this down, it's definitely not the hardtail to go flying up the hills, whipping through the tech stuff. It really comes down to it just not feeling, overly inspiring in that kind of setting, It doesn't really encourage you to get out of the saddle and pedal hard. But again, Sarah, I'm not sure the intended Growler rider really cares that much. Obviously, this bike is more about fun than fitness. It's more about just getting you to the top. It's not a climber's bike. And let's talk about what happens when you get to the top.
The Growler has a 64-degree head tube angle. It's got that longest wheelbase that you mentioned earlier. Does that mean it's a good descender?
Yeah, I think that's a huge part of the equation. Rocky calls this geometry progressive. I think I should just call it should be everywhere. I had a blast riding the Rocky, and it was the only hardtail of the bunch that I rode like a full suspension bike. And what that means is I was taking the same lines as I was on the full suspension bikes, which isn't true of the Fluid or the Canyon Stoic. But I was also doing the same things on the trails, the same manuals and the same wrong lines, that kind of stuff. Whereas on the other hardtails, I didn't have the confidence to do that. On the other hardtails, I was just going down the trail. I was still having fun. But on the Rocky, there's more trail to ride. And it's because of that geometry. Sort of the trail opens up. You have more possibilities. It feels like things are coming at you a little bit slower. And that means that I spent more time doing manuals, more time doing silly skids that I probably shouldn't be doing, all that kind of stuff.
You've mentioned the Norco. We've got that bike, which is pretty similar to the Vitus. How does this bike compare to those two?
Well, it's interesting because both of those brands, Norco and Vitus, they both describe their hardtails as using progressive geometry, but they're definitely not compared to the Rocky Mountain. The Rocky Mountain's Geo, that's the Geo that should be on all of these so-called progressive hardtails. It makes the bikes way more fun, and to be honest, it doesn't really subtract from them on all but the most technical, trickiest of climbs, which, I don't think most Growler owners are going to be too concerned with. So yeah, way more capable. It comes down to that geometry mostly. And now the flip side to that is that both the Norco and the Vitus have a more traditional feel to them. And I've been talking smack about that for the last few minutes, but there are probably still plenty of riders out there who are looking for that. The Growler doesn't have that quick responsive handling that some people are still looking for. If you still want that traditional quick handling hardtail feel, you're going to find it from the Norco and the Vitus Sentier?
Sentier? Let's just call it the Vitus.
Yeah, let's just call it the Vitus. Whereas the Growler is definitely more of a forward-thinking kind of hardtail that lets you go faster. So if that's not your jam and you don't need that, then maybe the Norco and the Vitus are your better option.
Let's talk about some of the components. Do you want to talk about some of the highlights of the builds on that Rocky?
Yeah, let's start with the good stuff first. I've already mentioned it comes with that wide handlebar. That really goes a long way to making the bike feel capable and ready for anything. Yeah, let's talk about the other thing that helps this bike be so capable is that Dior 12-speed drivetrain. It comes with an 1151 cassette on the back, so a huge gearing range, which if you're a new rider and this is your first mountain bike, or maybe you're just out of shape, and that's fine, the drivetrain really helps get you to the top of all the hills. You're not going to have any reason to change any parts of that. The other thing I want to point out, the tires. Sarah, I'm not usually a fan of 2.6-inch tires. I talk a lot about how I like, 2.35, 2.4s. They feel more precise. But on a hardtail, it's obviously a different story. I need all the help I can get.
Yeah, that's all the suspension you got, right?
Right?
Your tires.
Yeah, so it comes with WTB Vigilante and Trail Boss tires in a 2.6-inch width. They don't say Maxxis or Schwalbe on the side, but they work really well, everybody. I was impressed with them. We ran them at 21 and 23 PSI, same as the others, and they gave me absolutely no troubles, except for maybe not being the fastest rolling rubber out there, and that's fine. Again, I don't think Growler riders care.
No.
Yeah. The other thing we need to point out here is that Suntour Radon 140mm travel fork. Now, I don't rave about Suntour forks all that often, you know, but this thing, it actually worked really, really well. It has a lockout lever on the front, which comes in handy if, you know, you're doing a lot of climbing. It's a 140mm fork. If you're out of the saddle and pedaling hard, you might want to firm it up. The other thing to mention, it has a functional rebound dial, which is more than I could say for some of these forks that we have here on test. It works well, it's easy to set up once you have your air pressure sorted, and it's reasonably smooth as well. And yeah, no reason to upgrade until you start really sending it or something goes wrong.
What are some of the things that maybe you'd want to change if this were your, you know, daily hardtail?
Honestly, the list is really short, and it comes down to the brakes. Again, that's a theme for these value bikes, isn't it, Sarah?
Yeah.
A lot of times, value bikes come with organic or resin pads to save money, and the rotors required for them to work with those pads, and they're lacking initial bite. Now, with the Rocky, their particular two-piston brakes, I think they were MT4100s or something like that. Too many numbers, but they worked much better than the brakes on the Norco and some of the other bikes. But there's still not enough initial bite and not enough overall power. They're just two-piston brakes. Now, I don't think that you need to go to four-piston brakes. That's an expensive upgrade. But you definitely need to swap pads and rotors, put some metallic pads and better rotors on there, maybe even bigger rotors, especially if you're a bigger rider or your terrain is steep, you're definitely gonna want that.
Yeah, you're sending it harder on the Rocky, right?
I guess, yeah.
Time for the pros and cons. What's the good stuff?
Yeah, if you're looking for a capable hardtail that's not gonna hold you back, it's obviously this bike. This is the most capable hardtail of the bunch. And in a lot of ways, it's more capable than some of the full suspension bikes we have here. So there you go. The con though, if you're looking for a traditional hardtail, just stop. Don't look for that. But if that's exactly what you want, this isn't your bike. You're better off with the Norco or with the Vitus. They offer more traditional handling, quicker handling, and maybe that makes a lot of sense if your trails are less demanding.
Let's sum up the Rocky Mountain Growler.
Yeah, I don't know. Sarah, is it weird that I want to ride the Growler more than I want to ride the full suspension bikes?
I mean, you've not typically been known for liking hardtails, so it's pretty surprising.
Yeah, so the Growler reminded me just how much fun a capable hardtail can be. And if you're the kind of rider who doesn't have a lot of money to spend, you could save a bunch of that money by buying a bike that doesn't have rear suspension. And if that sounds like a good plan to you, the Growler is a good option if you like to have fun on the descents, and that's where you want to focus on.
There you have it. That's the Rocky Mountain Growler. Stay tuned for more videos from the Value Bikes field trip, as well as roundtable videos where we compare all of them.